dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to Farage. I'm Mark Steyn. It's that time of year when all the A-list presenters are on a beach in the Turks and Caicos and you just have to put up with whoever management found sleeping in the car park. But Nigel will return. Boxing Day, Christmas Bank Holiday Monday, Euro-compliant Backstop Tuesday, Chinese Year of the Pangolin. One day he'll be back. On tonight's show, COVID Narnia, always winter, never Christmas. Are your kids insufficiently depressed? Let's get them to dig a mass grave as a classroom exercise. And I'll be talking pints with Peter Tatchell, who, among other accomplishments, has attempted to perform multiple citizens' arrests on the late monster of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe. Are there any other Commonwealth heads of government you'd like Mr. Tatchell to perform a citizen's arrest on? You can tweet me that at GB News. You can email me on that, gbviews@gbnews.uk, because your comments and questions are the indispensable part of the show. It doesn't have to be on citizen's arrest by Peter Tatchell, whatever's on your mind. gbnews@gbnews or email gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's all coming up on Farage after the news with Polly.
Mark, thank you. Good evening. These are the latest news headlines. The Prime Minister says tougher COVID restrictions won't be introduced immediately in England, but the government isn't ruling out further action. Boris Johnson says the data is being monitored hourly and that arguments for stricter measures are very finely balanced. He's urging people to exercise caution over the Christmas period.
We agreed that we should keep the data from now on under constant review, keep following it hour by hour. And unfortunately, I must say to people, we will have to reserve the possibility of taking further action to protect the public and to protect public health, to protect our NHS.
Well, the Prime Minister also spoke about the importance of looking after the hospitality sector. He added measures are already in place to help struggling businesses, but the government will keep the economic side under constant review. That comes after leaders called for an emergency financial support package following a fall in bookings due to Omicron. The chief executive of Nighttime Industries Association told GB News the new restrictions are confusing.
We're hugely concerned, not only for the survival of businesses, but people's livelihoods. People that we've committed and managed to build up and gain momentum for this trade is now being stifled massively. COVID passes were presented as a mitigation that would keep nightclubs open. That's clearly not the case. And the concern that we have is at some point leading up to New Year's Eve is going to create some level of displacement. And that could go into things like illegal events or push people back into households, which we know full well are, highly transmissible.
Meanwhile, the Premier League has opted against introducing a circuit breaker despite COVID outbreaks in teams at a number of clubs. 6 of the weekend's 10 fixtures were postponed due to positive cases, and there had been suggestions that the round of games between December the 28th and December the 30th could be called off. But at a shareholders' meeting, the league decided to go ahead with its planned schedule, with decisions to be made on a game-by-game basis. Her Majesty the Queen has decided to celebrate Christmas at Windsor this year instead of going to Sandringham. It's believed Her Majesty would take precautions and follow all the appropriate guidelines. The royal family is expected to visit her over the festive period. You're up to date. Now let's get back to Mark Steyn.
Hey, welcome along to Farage. The Queen is not going to be spending Christmas at Sandringham. How about the rest of us? Has that star over Bethlehem been taken down on orders from Sage, or is it still up there in the sky? Let's get the latest from GBNews political editor Darren McCaffrey.
Yeah, very good evening, Mark. No restrictions in England for the time being. That was the word from the Prime Minister today after a very long cabinet meeting. In fact, we don't really see cabinet meetings lasting more than an hour. This went on for nearly 2.5 hours, and there clearly are disagreements within cabinet about whether there should be further restrictions in England either before or after Christmas. In fact, the decision seems to be being postponed because the cabinet cannot agree on what direction to take. We know that people like Michael Gove and Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, are quite keen to implement some restrictions to try and slow down the spread of Omicron here in the UK. But at the same time, many others concerned about those restrictions, the impact it could have on businesses, on the economy, but also, frankly, on people's Christmases. The bigger question is, could Boris Johnson get away with imposing restrictions, cancelling Christmas again, effectively, given his fall in support, not just amongst the wider public, particularly within the Conservative Party? And that's where there are, I think, concerns amongst his critics, Mark, but that potentially he's making these decisions not necessarily in the public health interest, but rather in party management interests, because given how large the rebellion was last week about imposing Plan B in England, you can well imagine that if he wanted to go further, that rebellion could be even bigger.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me, Darren. I mean, is there a political reality in that, regardless of what the scientists say, the majority of cabinet would not now back Boris Johnson if he were to cancel Christmas? In other words, there's no majority for cancelling Christmas among a cabinet that is beginning to get the jitters after North Shropshire and Lord Frost and all the rest of it.
Yeah, indeed, and Lord Frost is a perfect example of that. There are many who agree with him. He does not think that there is a need for further restrictions. Now, the government's main message in all of this, or the Prime Minister's message, is we need to wait, essentially, for the data. Now, that is a decision in itself, and it may well turn out to be proportionate. I mean, not all the evidence, the real-world evidence, is necessarily bad at the moment. We look at South Africa, which is clearly where Omicron was first discovered, and we have not seen a rise in hospitalisations like we've seen in previous waves, certainly not deaths. There does seem to be this decoupling from an enormous jump in cases, but nowhere near the same reflection in hospitalisations. There are even suggestions that the virus, or that variant there, may well have peaked. We know that hospitalisations are up in London here in the UK, which has been the epicentre of the recent spread, but that's not true elsewhere in England. So, the evidence today is not that conclusive, not least of all on whether this potentially is. Right. We certainly know it's more transmissible. We don't know whether it's less severe or not, but it seems to be pointing to the fact it could be less severe. In the end, though, listening to the Prime Minister today, and you're entirely right in saying that one of the reasons he cannot move at the moment is because he's politically boxed in. But the tone, at least, from Boris Johnson was very much a sense of when restrictions might come into play, not if. And that is why there are lots of suggestions that even though we might have a clear run at Christmas in England, that in the end, those restrictions could come into place just a couple of days afterwards.
Yes, that seems to be the way it's looking, Darren. Make the most of Boxing Day, because Monday is going to be the day you're boxed in. Thank you for that, Darren. This is a common problem around the Western world. Christmas greetings from Joe Biden. From the official White House website, courtesy of Jeff Zients, the US Coronavirus Response Coordinator. We are intent on not letting Omicron disrupt work and school for the vaccinated. You've done the right thing and we will get through this. For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death for yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm, unquote. Gee, whatever happened to goodwill to all men? You and your loved ones are all going to die. Let's just hope you don't take the hospital receptionist down with you. By the way, the definition of the reviled pariah class of the unvaccinated appears to be expanding. Here is the Chief Public Health Officer of the province of Ontario explaining why the triple vaccinated should give the bum's rush to the anti-vax, superstitious, stump-toothed, knuckle-dragging, rube denialist, merely double vaccinated.
As a twice vaccinated person with no symptoms of COVID-19, should I feel safe or feel it's worth the risk to see a grandparent who's had 3 vaccine shots over the holidays?
I personally would advise you to avoid social contact with anyone older, even with 2 doses. If you are going to interact, I'd do it outdoors with masking and distancing in place. I hope the weather stays reasonable across Ontario to enable that, because I think all of us have to learn from the last 20 months to best protect those that are older in our communities. I'm sorry to recommend that. I'd obviously have to understand your complete situation.
So, as a commenter put it to me earlier today, the more boosters you have, the more you're at risk from people with slightly fewer boosters. Got that? Tune in Wednesday when he'll be explaining why the quadruple vaccinated should have no truck whatsoever with the triple vaccinated. On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a booster. On the second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me a second booster. On the third day of Christmas, how many days of Christmas are there? Let's check in with Sage, because they're the science. And we must all follow the science like a star in the sky. They are the 3 wise men of Sage, the most scientific minds in the whole of science are saying that Omicron could cause 200 to 6,000 deaths a day. These are the experts. Would you put up with this level of expertise in any other area of life? I'm thinking of repaving my driveway. Could you give me an estimate? Oh, no problem, mate. It'll be between 200 and 6,000 quid. Oh, thanks. That's very helpful. I've put in a conservatory and a room over the garage. What do you think the house is worth? Oh, in today's market, I'd say it's worth between £200,000 and £6 million. 2 years into this thing, Sage don't give any probabilities for these predictions, except that the low end of 200 deaths a day depends on going back to squads of coppers descending on little old ladies in the park for sitting on the bench too long. That's the world we'll be in after Boxing Day, judging from the lines we're reading between in Boris Johnson's utterances. Oh, and Sage assumed that Omicron is going to be as deadly as Delta, because that makes it easier to model a doomsday scenario in 20 minutes and then spend the rest of the day face down in the wassail. Professor Graham Medley, chair of the SAGE modelers, tweeted over the weekend that he doesn't model the non-doomsday scenario because if no doomsday is looming, the government doesn't have to do anything. Quote, "That scenario doesn't inform anything. Decision makers don't have to decide if nothing happens," unquote. That isn't correct, of course. The decision not to act is itself a decision. As the old saying goes, don't just do something, stand there. That would make an interesting philosophy for a political party running in the UK elections. We put the lockdown in, the lockdown out, in, out, shake it all about. To what end? Shoot me an email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Now, let us go to George Lomonosov, and he's a virologist at the John Innes Centre in Norfolk. What do you make of where we stand a few days before Christmas here, Professor?
Good evening. I thought the Prime Minister's address was I mean, basically all he could say really in the circumstances, because there's, as you've been mentioning, a lot of uncertainty about where we're going. I mean, obviously this variant is extremely transmissible, but how that's going to translate in the future into hospitalizations and deaths potentially, we're probably not going to know for about another week or so. And so that there's just this huge uncertainty in this.
The thing is, we've had 2 years of this now, Professor, and 2 years is a long time. It's for many children, particularly. It's like it's a fifth of their entire lives, living in this weird, psychologically unhealthy world. If no one's talking now about getting rid of COVID, if it's going to be around forever, if it's like, say, consumption, tuberculosis in the 19th century, it's just out there and it might randomly strike at any time, why don't we just do with it what we did with consumption, tuberculosis in the 19th century and just get on with our lives?
Well, the point I would make, and it's a good example, consumption TB, is that, of course, people didn't just let it go. There were huge efforts to control it. I mean, people were sent away to sanatoria and confined in very draconian ways. And then, of course, at the same time, not so much in the 19th century, but more in the 20th century, huge efforts to find ways of treating it, ultimately with things like streptomycin or various other more modern antibiotics. So we with other diseases, we haven't, in a sense, just said, well, we can't do much. You do what you can. It may not always be effective, but try and use all sorts of methods to sort of get it down to the lowest possible level you can.
But if 200 years ago a prime minister had suggested we in effect shut down the economy, in fact we shut down the global economy everywhere except China and Sweden until we have eradicated consumption, everybody in most countries would have said this is completely nuts. You can't stifle the energy and innovation of a society. You can't make it lived in a permanently cramped, cowed, fetal position in and out for years on end. How is this ever going to end if we're still talking about lockdowns 2 years into it?
Well, I think what's happened is, in fact, in a way, historically, this is quite a short period. I mean, it doesn't seem like it to us, of course, because the vaccines have been developed very, very quickly. And one can see a way that with, even more advances, such as, combining different vaccines to make them, effective against multiple strains rather than just one at a time, like you do with flu. They may not be perfect, but gradually you will, you would hope, see, less and less transmission. And it may just become a low-level problem. But you can, tackle viral diseases. I mean, virtually eliminated polio worldwide, have eliminated smallpox. And those were major scourges, say, in the 19th century. I mean, smallpox, makes up a lot of the component of Dickens's stories. And there wasn't really a view of that you shouldn't do anything. It was, you do what you can. And of course, going back to the 18th century, we had Edward Jenner with, the cowpox story, which I think most people know. So people were really trying very, very hard to try and, relieve the scourge. It's just that it wasn't that successful in that era. But, huge increases in sanitation. Cholera was a massive problem.
Well, thank you for that, Professor. I think it should be said so that the extreme statewide or even citywide measures have now gone on longer, for example, than the Great Plague did in 1666. They were in and out of this thing, and then life went back to normal. But I take your point that in the great span of the history of the United Kingdom, that 2 years is not the longest time. But the public health regime has had plenty to say about cases and vaccination rates. but it's been unconcerned with other health indicators and certainly with economic indicators. And anyone who was around for Britain's long, remorseless post-war decline will be familiar with the way this goes. First they say, oh, well, we have to subsidise shipbuilding in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Oh, and steel and coal mines in Northern England are no longer profitable. And then we need to nationalise the car you drive, so the cars are all made by the government. Yet even in the 60s and 70s, no one foresaw a scenario in which the economy had been so devastated that pubs would need government subsidy. If drinking alcohol is no longer a profitable business in today's Britain, what's left? Maybe we should just close up the whole joint. Here now is Ollie Vorkard, Managing Director of the Vorkard Group, which owns a big bunch of bars and restaurants in Newcastle. Ollie, what is the situation in the hospitality sector 5 days before Christmas, when it ought to be absolute boom time in your biz?
I don't think the national picture is one joined-up picture. Certainly the southeast and London are very, very badly hit. Currently the northeast, where I'm based, we are so far pretty low down the Omicron infection ratings. So our customers have confidence and we're not losing staff, but with all the doom mongering, it feels like that could be around the corner.
Well, what is the solution to this? Because nobody running a business in which more than, whatever you want to say, 5 or 10 people gather in a room at one time has any ability to plan now. For two years, people have been in, out, lockdown, semi-lockdown. You can be at, you're shut entirely. You can be open at 50% capacity. No, we're going down to 25% capacity. How is it actually possible for pub keepers or for restaurateurs even to want to stay in the industry they're in?
Well, certainly to stay in the industry, I'm more than happy to hang in here. I mean, it's a wonderful industry. I've been involved in it for 30 years. It's given me some great experiences, but 2020 wasn't one of those great experiences. It was hugely demoralising. I took no joy taking huge sums of government subsidy and loans and debt, and a very, very challenging time. We began reopening 12th of April this year, and as an industry, we've overcome many challenges. We've started to get back on our feet. We had initially a supply problem. There wasn't enough beer available. There wasn't enough food available. Then we had a staffing problem, and there weren't enough staff available. And as we've come towards Christmas, we felt we had a head of steam. We sort of found a new state of play. Certainly in the end of November, my company was fully staffed for the first time since February 2020. We weren't having supply issues. So Christmas felt a real point of celebration. And it's the last 3 weeks have been subdued. We are probably 15 to 20% down. I suspect I'm one of the very, very lucky ones. Right. But the real challenge now is what do I say to my staff? What do I tell them the future holds? What do I say to my suppliers, my butchers, my brewers, my cleaners, all of these people who are looking at me for answers, and I haven't got them because we have no guidance, we have no clarity. And I was over the moon to hear today when Boris said, look, we're not making a decision now. That's great, but it feels it buys me 3 or 4 days. And we make decisions in this industry over 5, 10, 15 years, not 3 or 4 days.
Well, no, and it's a big problem if, for example, he decides on Monday, as all the talk is, that he's going to be locking us down to one degree or another. I take it that New Year is actually quite a profitable time for your sector of the economy, and it looks like he might well end up cancelling New Year. Do you think you're going to get any kind of financial so-called support package out of this government?
There seems to be a great deal of resistance to it, doesn't there? And there's certainly no noise coming with it. At the very, very least, I would hope there'd be support for our staff. These guys my guys are working now, and they're working in venues, and they're working around people, and they're giving great service. And, they are no less immune to the news or to Omicron news, but they're in there doing their jobs, and they're doing a great job. And I would hope that as a country, a version of furlough would look after them. We as businesses, I suspect as an industry, the appetite for bottomless new amounts of debt is probably somewhat limited. And I don't know how much money the Chancellor would want to give us, and how much money the general taxpayer would want to give us. This has to end eventually. You can't just keep chucking money. The money's got to come from somewhere.
No, you're right. This is going to be, the cost of all this is going to be like the cost of the First World War, where we didn't basically finish paying it off until a century later. So whoever's going to be Prime Minister in the 22nd century is going to be the guy who finally pays off all the money we've borrowed over this. Thank you for that, Ollie. And cheers and good luck to you over what is looking to be a not terribly convivial Christmas season. Give us your thoughts, GBviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBnews on bailing out the pubs and indeed every other business that is dependent on persons leaving their homes and gathering in numbers higher than single figures. And if they do need a bailout, where is all that money going to come from? All straight ahead as this Christmas week Farage continues.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. We keep a lot of cloud in the sky, I think, during the next 24 hours, but by the start of Tuesday, there is an increasing chance of cloud breaks in some places, leading to a frosty start, but a good chance of sunshine by the afternoon. Here's the area of high pressure that's been keeping us dry, settled, but also mostly cloudy during the last few days. Now, during Monday, some slightly less moist air drifted in from the east, and that's led to those cloud bases lifting a touch and a better chance of breaks developing within the cloud. But these breaks are always quite tenuous and difficult to pinpoint, so a good chance across central and western parts of the country that we'll start off with those cloud breaks and a touch of frost in places on Tuesday morning. But in general, we keep a lot of cloud, I think, particularly in the east and in the south. And again, we'll see a lot of that cloud drift around during Tuesday itself. But you can see some reasonable cloud breaks and sunshine developing during the afternoon across parts of central and western England into Wales, western Scotland as well. A pleasant enough day where we get some sunshine coming through at last. Otherwise, mostly it's cloudy and it's feeling cold, 5, 6, 7 Celsius, about as high as those temperatures will get. And then with the chance of those more extensive cloud breaks by the end of Tuesday, we go into the start of Wednesday with the fairly widespread frost, I think, across Scotland, England and Wales, particularly away from towns and cities, temperatures dipping a degree or so below freezing. But for Northern Ireland, it's milder as cloud rolls in here and the first signs of a change on the way midweek. Outbreaks of rain, a wet start for Northern Ireland, and then those outbreaks of rain pushing into southwestern Scotland by the afternoon, as well as Wales and southwest England. Some heavy rain for a time, and that moves into the colder air further east. So there's the chance of some snow on the tops of the Pennines and Scottish mountains, but it turns milder and wetter in the south.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back to Farage. Let's get to your reaction to our top story. Dunland on Twitter says, seriously though, when and where does it end? Are we locking down? Well, I'll take that first question. Seriously though, when and where does it end? Never. It's COVID, Stan, now and forever. There's never going to be any end, in part because a critical mass of the people are evidently quite happy living like this. Maybe they'll lose the habits of even going to the pub or going to the restaurant. You know, on Broadway the other night, they all gathered to watch Moulin Rouge the musical. That was their first mistake. It's not a great show, but they paid hundreds of dollars to go and see it. And 2 minutes before curtain up, a guy comes out and says someone in the company had tested positive for COVID. We don't know whether it's the leading man. We don't know whether it's one of the fetching young gentlemen of the chorus who'd be prancing around at the back of the stage. We don't know whether it's a deputy makeup artist. But because one person had tested positive, all those people who'd paid hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a ticket to Moulin Rouge the musical were told they had to go home. How many of those guys do you think are going to be anxious to book tickets for a Broadway show ever again? Eventually, after a certain amount of time, you lose the habit of doing these things. Dunland continues, are we locking down every Christmas? Will every winter mean foregoing festive cheer and family visits for the sake of the new flu? We need to learn to live with COVID. That's the alternative, really, living with COVID or having our societies die with COVID, which is what's happening now. Mark says, there is no evidence to support another lockdown. We were told the Omicron variant infections would double every 2 to 3 days. It hasn't. Deaths and hospitalizations are still low, so where's the evidence for further restrictions? Mike says, a definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. That's the problem here. Going into lockdown beyond about, April or May last year, 2020, prolonging it after that was really a mistake, but they can never admit that. It didn't do anything for the rate of deaths per capita. The United Kingdom has a higher rate of deaths per capita than Sweden, which didn't do anything. And we can argue about that, about how it would have gone. There probably would have been an overwhelming of the NHS in the sense that there would have been people with COVID who were unable to get into the ICU. That very probably would have happened. But what's happened since is exactly what would have happened anyway. As people like to say, the COVID's going to COVID. And attempting to artificially impact the course of a virus like this to the point where you're shutting down entire countries has not actually done it. I mean, look at these guys in the Netherlands is all shut down now. France says, oh yes, these vaccines are terrific. You only need one every 4 months. That's what they say in France. You need to get a shot every. What vaccine do you need to get every 4 months? Then you're a chronically ill person. And what's it going to? That's what it is now. 4 months. What's your betting by February? That's going to be down to once every 2 months, once every 6 weeks. If you need to be jabbed once every 6 weeks, you've got a chronic disease. Is the chronic disease COVID, or is it actually government control freak governments? Ian says Omicron is like a cold. Actually, Omicron sounds like the cure for a cold. It sounds, oh, have you got any Lemsip? Oh, no, you don't want to use the Lemsip. Omicron is much better than Lemsip. Omicron is like a cold. Both my son and daughter-in-law have had Omicron and they never stopped working. Why? Oh, Ian, we're going to have to get rid of you there. If you're saying that you've been in contact with your son and daughter-in-law who've had Omicron, I don't know whether it's safe even to read out an email from you. This email could be infected with Omicron. Has the government, have we had the word from Sage on whether it's safe to read out an email from someone who has family members with Omicron? Why do people with a cold go to hospital? And why do hospitals admit people with a cold? You're making too much sense there, Ian. Okay, Conservative cabinet ministers have been, as you'll have gathered from our initial opening of the show, Conservative cabinet ministers already teasing us into the psychology of a lockdown, not yet officially announced. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, he's just back from California, where no one knows what a chancellor or an exchequer is, but he had a grand old time and he's returned early to show that he's not like certain of his cabinet colleagues who indignantly deny that any Christmas parties have taken place, even as social media is awash with spads doing conga lines up the Downing Street staircase past Sir Robert Peel and the Marquess of Salisbury. Mr. Sunak has instead been holding talks with business leaders on what they call a support package for pubs and restaurants, as we referenced earlier. He's also telling people to downsize their Christmas beanos. Okay, if you have to, you can have grandma and grandpa, but you definitely don't want to have your aunt and uncle. And one way to support British pubs would be, I don't know, I'm just taking a crazy flyer here, but to perhaps permit them to run their businesses as they did in these islands for centuries until the spring of 2020. That apparently is too obvious a solution, though. Joining me is the economist Jeevan Sandhar. Jeevan, there used to be a concept, in fact, I believe it's an economics concept, that apparently was widely held until roughly March 2020, which was called cost-benefit analysis. We never seem to get that from Sage or from the government. In other words, an overall consideration of the effects of doing something on the COVID front versus what it might do to the economy or the mental health of citizens who have to stay in their flats or whatever. What do you make of the absence of cost-benefit analysis, which has really characterized the last 2 years?
Well, actually, cost-benefit analysis would say you have to lock down earlier to stop the virus from spreading. The fundamental economic lesson of this pandemic has always been this. The wider COVID spreads, the more that people are scared about socially interacting, the worse the economic hit is. Why did the UK have one of the worst economic growth rates in 2020? Because we locked down too late 3 times, and we also had one of the worst death rates as well. A cost-benefit analysis would tell us that if you lock down earlier for a short amount of time, you will end up benefiting in the long run. Now, no one wants to lock down, but that is the right economic decision to be in, or it has been in the past. We will see what happens with this Omicron variant as we go forward.
Well, just a minute there, Jeevan. So you're saying that instead of locking down in March, the first time, 2020, the first time we'd have heard about this from the news coming out of China, granted all the lies and the dissembling and the WHO. But in other words, if we'd shut down for, say, 2 weeks to flatten the curve in January, you think that might have done in January of 2020, you think that might have done the trick?
Well, what it would have done was it would have meant that COVID didn't spread as widely. We wouldn't have to have locked down for as long as we did in March, right? Because COVID has spread so widely, we had to lock down for a longer period. The longer that we can't socially interact, the longer the cost is to the economy. Why aren't people going to the pub today? Because they're worried about catching COVID. If you let COVID spread more widely, or at least before the vaccines, then actually the problem that we had was we had to kind of shut it down for much longer. So yes, if people can't socially interact, that does hit the economy because you're not spending down the pub. And if you let COVID spread more widely, you can't socially interact for a much longer period of time.
Well, what about where we are now 2 years later? Because we've had again, from a cost-benefit analysis point of view, we've had the vaccines. We've had the vaccines for a year now, and we have had fantastic uptake rates in the vaccines. And so you have, I think it's in people above the age of 12, they're over 90% vaccinated. And yet new strains of the virus are still able to get from the other side of the planet to the United Kingdom in nothing flat and then start to disperse around the country. So what is knowing what we know from these last 2 years, what's the weighing of the pros and cons when it comes to dealing with something like Omicron then?
Yeah, I mean, look, Omicron is spreading incredibly rapidly. We certainly weren't or couldn't have known that this was going to happen. The short truth, or the unpleasant truth, is that no one wants to lock down, but if it does mean the NHS is overwhelmed, it's in our long-term economic interest to do so. We don't want to have to stop interacting, but if we're going to have to do it, we're going to have to do it. A very small percentage of hospitalizations, or a very large number of cases, will overwhelm the NHS. And again, then people will stop socially interacting. So it's not something that I think people want to do, but if it has to be done, we might end up in that particular situation.
Well, at a certain point, though, just looking at how this impacts the NHS isn't a cost. But the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is more than just its government health service. At some point, protecting the NHS starts to look like some kind of fetish rather than an objective target. Thank you for that, though, Jeevan. The economic, well, it's beyond the economic analysis as well, because as I said, we're also talking about all the deferred cancer appointments, all the excess strokes, heart attacks, and the other conditions that are afflicting the populace. Mark Steyn in for Farage. It's time, even though Nigel is not here, for What the Farage. And this story I love. Quidditch is cancelled. Yes, you know how J.K. Rowling is a dirty, rotten, stinking transphobe for her eccentric belief that a woman does not have a penis between her legs. You might not think that a woman has a penis between her legs, but when you play Quidditch, you've got a broomstick between your legs, which is the next best thing. She invented this sport for her books, and it's taken hold in the real world. The US Quidditch and Major League Quidditch, these are sports leagues in the United States, have issued a joint statement announcing that they're going to change the name of the sport because of their commitment to, quote, gender equality and inclusivity. Just to be clear on this, J.K. Rowling, this is from her books. No Harry Potter, no J.K. sitting in that greasy spoon in Glasgow or whatever it was writing these books. They wouldn't have a sport to play. And now they're going to change the name of the sport because they don't want to be associated with her outrageous transphobia. Why don't you grab that broomstick, beat yourself over the head with it, and try to come up with an original idea of your own, or at least change. If you don't want to play Quidditch anymore, just change the name of your league to lazy, opportunist, third-rate, unimaginative nobodies who can't even come up with their own sport. Anyway, so much for Quidditch. Oh yeah, I love this. Do you like Demi Lovato? Me neither. Anyway, this is the pop singer. She came out earlier this year as non-binary. I have no idea whether she's got a broomstick between her legs. But anyway, I shouldn't say she, by the way. I've just misgendered her, so I've probably just destroyed my career because Demi goes by they, them pronouns. So they, did I get that right? They is combating the scourge. Is it they are combating or they is combating? I don't know. They is combating the scourge of ghost sexism. Demi Lovato has been serenading a ghost to help the ghost heal from past trauma due to sexism. Apparently, the ghost was only comfortable opening up to Demi Lovato after the male paranormalists left the room. I thought if you were a ghosts are supposed to scare other people, but apparently, at least in the case of Demi Lovato's ghost, even ghosts can be triggered. Anyway, I'm triggered by Demi Lovato singing. Let's have a bit of Demi Lovato. Here we go. We got some Demi Lovato. Let's have a bit of that.
I will be rising from the ground like a skyscraper.
There we go. Standing ovation.
Cool.
I think that's the okay for us to come in, yes.
That's so cool. That's the coolest.
So if you have a non-binary ghost who needs to be de-triggered by Demi Lovato, that's the way it is. Finally, a Washington, D.C. teacher has been placed on leave after teaching her 8- and 9-year-old students history by having them reenact the Holocaust. That's perfect for 8- and 9-year-olds. You may be, I don't know whether this is just some epic trolling story in which they're doing this so that the schools all decide to shut down and just go back to Zoom for another 7 years. In this case, it was equal opportunity casting, though, because the teacher got the Jewish boy in the class to play Adolf Hitler, and it was such a lifelike class that the poor Jewish boy was also made to pretend to act out Hitler's suicide in the bunker. The rest of the kids had to dig mass graves for themselves as part of the Holocaust. The teacher has been put on leave, which, as you know, that means the teacher is just going to be sitting at home getting paid without having to go to the bother of turning up at school and teaching anybody anything. So if you thought your kids weren't traumatized enough by the last couple of years of the COVID, when they do go back to school, they're told that for today's classroom exercise, they're going to be digging mass graves. That is our What the Farage story. When we return, we'll sit down for Talking Pints, and later on there's no Farage to Barrage, but you can instead stump the Steyn. Ask me anything. GBViews at GBnews.uk. Lots more straight ahead.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
GBviews at gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hey, Talking Pints is being conducted virtually tonight. This may well be the last pub open in the United Kingdom by the time Boxing Day rolls around, and it's a great pleasure to welcome the one and only Peter Tatchell. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I raise a glass to one of the few men who can say they've performed a citizen's arrest on Robert Mugabe. Peter Tatchell joins us. He's the subject of a Netflix documentary all about Peter Tatchell called Hating Peter Tatchell, and certainly a lot of people did 40 years ago, back when this young man from Australia first became a presence in United Kingdom politics. Peter, let me ask you about that business with Mugabe. A lot of the left sort of changed their position on Robert Mugabe when he started calling, Tony Blair the gay gangster, leading the gay government of the gay United Gay Kingdom, and accusing Blair of attempting to impose homosexuality throughout the Commonwealth and other particular peculiar fancies of Mr. Mugabe. But in a sense, you were actually one of the few people to attempt to do anything about him. Are you disappointed by the attitude of the sort of Guardianista left towards African homophobia?
Well, certainly I was very disappointed at the general neglect and inaction, not just concerning Robert Mugabe's homophobia, but the fact that he was detaining political opponents without trial, torturing them, and sometimes killing them. So for me, the issue of Robert Mugabe was never just about homophobia. It was about the whole gamut of his human rights abuses. And I think, it was very disappointing about the way in which many on the left and the liberal side of politics, they were very strong against apartheid in South Africa, but did very little against Mugabe's regime. And Mugabe's regime actually killed more black Africans than even the evil apartheid regime.
Yes, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because their thinking seems to be that if it's white Afrikaners killing blacks, that's a bad thing. But the minute, as in Rhodesia, Ian Smith is gone and out of the Prime Minister's residence, and it's black guys killing black guys, somehow that's something we should just leave them to get on with. I mean, it's a cynical calculation, is it? Or do you think they actually mean that in some sense?
I think there's a lot of post-colonial guilt. That drives a lot of these double standards. And we see it in other areas as well. Obviously, I am very critical of some religious preachers, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, who are anti-gay. But I will absolutely defend people of faith who are being persecuted. So I defend and support campaigns about Christians being persecuted in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the northern regions of Nigeria. For me, human rights are human rights. It doesn't matter who's doing it or who the victims are. We have to take a stand to defend human rights for everyone.
Yeah, you're very punctilious about that. To mention another example, this guy Karadawi, who Ken Livingstone invited to London at one point, and who was presented in the British media as a liberal, reforming Islamic scholar. And in fact, his position on gays is that he's relaxed about whether you throw them off the roofs of buildings or you set them alight. That's something that we need a lot more thoughtful Islamic jurisprudence to consider, but they're both viable methods. I mean, this guy was being presented in the London papers as an impeccably liberal, reforming voice. And you were one of the very few people telling the truth about him.
Well, he wasn't just incredibly homophobic. to the point of wanting to execute gay people. He also said that it was justified for husbands to beat their wives. He also said that women who dress immodestly bring rape upon themselves. He said that all Jews should are the enemy, and it was justified to kill them. I mean, this is shocking stuff. And you're absolutely right. It was really hard to get anyone of the left or the right to stand up and protest against his presence in London.
Yeah, there's a lot of cheap grace around, and this goes back to where you came in your first election campaigns 4 decades back, where again the sort of snide, underhand and campaigns that they were running against you in South London 4 decades ago. It's almost as if the sort of public virtue signalling, while at the same time something darker going on underneath, is part of how the left does things here.
Well, to be honest,
I'm talking about the Liberals. The
Liberal. Yeah, and certainly the Liberal Party, which stood against me with their candidate Simon Hughes, did resort to some very dirty tricks. You know, they made false claims about the Labour Council was going to increase the rates by 135%. It was complete bunkum. They went around, the male Liberal canvassers went around with stickers saying, "I've been kissed by Peter Tatchell," to draw attention to me being gay and supporting gay rights, to appeal to the homophobic vote. And during that election campaign, I was violently assaulted over 150 times. There were more than 30 bricks and bottles thrown through my flat windows. I had a bullet through the front door, 2 arson attempts, and 2 attempts to...
You've survived all that, Peter, and it's very impressive. And as I said, the way you've actually strengthened yourself and then gone on to take it to West Papua and other causes is very impressive. We are out of time, but do not fear, because the one and only Colin Brazier is standing around and he will follow the weather. I'll see you tomorrow.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. We keep a lot of cloud in the sky, I think, during the next 24 hours, but by the start of Tuesday, there is an increasing chance of cloud breaks in some places, leading to a frosty start, but a good chance of sunshine by the afternoon. Here's the area of high pressure that's been keeping us dry, settled, but also mostly cloudy during the last few days. Now, during Monday, some slightly less moist air drifted in from the east, and that's led to those cloud bases lifting a touch and a better chance of breaks developing within the cloud. But these breaks are always quite tenuous and difficult